Have you ever had to deal with a difficult tech before? What about a tech that causes you some trouble inside your business with your team? Or what about a tech that's always a jerk to your clients? Those things can happen in our space, and I think it's important that we get into some of those things today because I think it's important that we come up with some strategies to deal with some techs that kind of cause you some frustration. My name is Adam Hammond. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple of decades, and I've led many techs in my tenure. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and yes, I have seen the ugly. So today we're going to talk about a number of different types of technicians that might cause you some frustration within your business. The different types of techs that come to mind are the grumpy tech, the always right tech, the toxic tech, and the non-documenting tech, right? Those are the four main categories I think kind of work in this space. And no matter what you do as an MSP business owner or as a manager of people, you need to address these things as early as possible because failure to address these types of tech issues indicates your culture isn't where it probably should be. So let's get into the ramble today. One of the adages that I lean into heavily, and I've heard it from others as well, but the one I lean into heavily is that the tech that's right for you at point A might not be the tech that's right for you at point B or point C, right? So said differently, those techs at 2 or 3 employees that are great might not be great when you're at 10 employees, and they may not be great when you're at 20 employees either, right? So think about that as you grow, because some of the behavior when you're small is actually desirable when you're 2 or 3 employees, but when you have a bigger team, it becomes harder and harder to deal with. And frankly, some of the things just become a thing you have to address, because if you don't address it, ultimately, kind of permeates within your culture and causes your team to struggle with things that they wouldn't ordinarily struggle with. So let's begin with the types of techs, right? Like I said before, we've got 4 of them, right? And so the first one is that grumpy tech, right? Your grumpy tech is someone who just doesn't like dealing with users, or they don't mind it, but they really would prefer not to, right? They're the techs that are, that stereotypical, like, oh man, I can't believe this user is, so stupid, or this user did this thing that they shouldn't have done, or that, that just dealing with these people is just such a problem, right? It's those types of things that you hear from these techs. This type of tech gets jaded somewhere along the line, and they just get tired dealing with users. And so you have a couple different options. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we get into it. But sometimes MSPs like to kind of hide this tech around the corner, maybe in their knock or their sock. That might be an okay spot for them to be. But frankly, a tech that is kind of grumpy with users and doesn't like solving problems for users might not be a good spot for them in any kind of MSP. The second type of tech is that always right tech, the tech that is just always has to be right about everything, right? And you know the type I'm talking about, you've seen it in the space, right? This type of tech just either is argumentative with their own staff, and they have to be right when they're talking about kind of whatever's going on within the organization, or they kind of always have to be right with their clients, right? Where they almost like demean their clients and talk down to them about, this is the right way of doing things and you did it the wrong way. Like, you need to have a little bit more gentle touch, right? You need to have a little bit better bedside manner than to just, be right all the time. And the challenge with this is that they often are right. They often are technically correct. It's more about the delivery of that being correct than it is about the actual like data and the message within the conversation itself, right? Think a little bit about teaching the client about how to prevent this in the future versus you did it wrong, right? There's definitely a way of handling it, right? It actually really irritates me when I call in or if I ask for help and someone's like, well, you did it wrong. Yeah, I might have done it wrong, but maybe you tell me, hey, you know what, in the future, this might work better, right? Though it's that kind of behavior, that kind of thing that really is just can be grating for clients. And really both the grumpy tech and the always right tech might scare your clients away because clients don't want to deal with that, right? And they're paying a lot of money to you every single month. Why would they want to deal with that if that's who you have on your staff, right? One of the things I do in addition to my day job is I actually publish my own newsletter monthly. If you'd like to join my newsletter, I'm going to drop the link down below in the description of this video. And this newsletter is like a once a month kind of a thing where I talk a little bit about all the things that are going on, a little bit about the industry at large, and give you some opportunities for some additional content that might be beneficial to you and your business. So please check it out. The third type of tech that you might run into is sort of that toxic tech. Now, the toxic tech oftentimes has different pieces of all the different types of techs that cause some challenges, right? They might be a little bit grumpy. They might be on that, always have to be right side of the road. But oftentimes they're just a challenge to work with, right? They know the right way because they've been there longer. They have more experience or whatever else, and that may or may not be true. But it's really just how they interact with their other team members, because these techs are really, really hard to suss out, because oftentimes they behave perfectly well around the owner, around the management, and whatever else. But kind of behind closed doors, when people have their back turned, they let that toxicity fly freely, and that's not a thing that you want to have in your organization. I one time observed a tech that was in a meeting, and there was somebody kind of passing through the meeting, and the person that was passing through the meeting had an idea about how to handle the situation differently than that was being discussed. And rather than saying, hey, thanks for the input, and move on, this person then proceeded to kind of berate this person for why are you even talking to us? You are on a different team and whatever else. And mind you, the tech that was passing through was actually a fair amount more senior in their career. So, it's this kind of like turf war-y kind of thing where you might run into as well, where this toxic tech is just protective of the way things have always been. They're a little grumpy usually. They're always kind of right. There's sort of a mix of all those things, and they hide it well when the owner or manager is around. And the last tech that I want to talk about today is the non-documenting tech, right? This is a tech that just can never get the time entered in right. Maybe they mean to do it at night when they get home, or they just forget to do it, or it's just not that important to them. It's usually more on the, I'm really busy, I don't have time to do this right now, I have to spend time doing something else first, versus like, I don't think it's important at all, or I'm just not going to do it because I don't feel like doing my job. It's usually more on that, like I need to feel like I should do this later, versus, we want to log our time on time, and have it accurate and do it as we go throughout the day, right? It's usually that more than anything else. It used to be the non-documenting tech was the tech that would like hoard information and keep it in their head and give it out spoonful at a time to the other techs. And this was much more pervasive in the 90s and the early 2000s. I think a lot of that's kind of gone by the wayside. In fact, I've kind of built my career in the IT space about trying to teach other techs how to do things more than trying to hoard all the information for myself, because frankly, there's plenty of jobs for all of us, plenty of work for all of us to do. And no one's got time to be that person that wants to hand that information out spoonful at a time. This non-documenting tech actually can cause you a lot more issues but they're quieter at first, right? They're issues where you don't have enough billable time logged, you aren't logging stuff in projects, your clients are calling up and they're saying, hey, so-and-so was just here and they solved an issue for me, but we have this other issue, but nobody knows what that person actually did, so they're trying to get them on the phone or whatever. Like it's that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more hidden, but it's really a thing that you want to make sure you solve for, because if you don't, it's going to end up really hurting you at some point in the future, and it's going to be a mystery as to when that's going to happen until it really happens. It becomes a really big problem for you. One of the questions might be, how do you figure out that you have a tech that lands in one or multiples of these categories? And the easiest way is, of course, if a client complains, right? If a client talks to you about this during a customer satisfaction survey or CSAT, or if you do a Net Promoter Score, NPS, or if you do like a strategic business review meeting or your business review meetings, SBRs, on the account management side, usually that kind of comes out in those conversations. But oftentimes it's that person says on the phone, or when they're talking to one of your other techs, hey, I really got to have you today because the last time I worked with so-and-so, that was a challenge. Or it's that kind of stuff that kind of comes up. The other area where this can come forward is if your teammates and other team members say, hey, this person's really driving me crazy. I heard them being grumpy with this individual. They always have to be right. Those kind of things. Those usually come up in your one-on-one conversations and some other kind of like employee feedback conversations. If you're getting that feedback from folks, especially if it's from a few different people, it's worth listening to. Now, I'm not saying that one kind of complaint from an employee about another employee is time to get out a special investigator unit to dive into this. But if you get two or three of those things, it's probably enough to say that where there's smoke, there's probably some fire. So be mindful of that when people are coming to you with frustrations about a person on your team. If you're getting some value out of this, and if you like my videos, please do me a favor, hit that like button. It really does help. So now we've talked about the different types of text. Now, I'd love a comment below if you have other different examples of text that you run into that don't fit these previous ones, because I would love to have better information. Also, would love to have some conversations about it. So drop a comment below about that as well. But when it comes to like handling and dealing with these texts, I think the biggest piece is that your culture must not allow these texts to be in the culture, right? If you allow text to come in and be grumpy and jerky with your clients, or you allow text to kind of like just be not good humans with other humans that work on your team or your clients overall, that's a culture that needs to be adjusted, right? So how do you correct this culture issue? How do you solve for this? Well, the first thing is really all about fixing your hiring process, because it all starts with the hiring process. So when I used to hire people and when I used to do the interviews of things, I actually stepped quickly away from the technical side of the world, because frankly, I had people that were better at technical interviews than I were. But one of the things I really talked to people about was what I like to call the no a-hole test, right? I was looking to suss out any of the assholes that I might run into on a regular basis. And so what I would do is I would have a conversation with the person. And it would just be an open-ended conversation, talk about kind of the life, the universe, and everything, and really just try to have an open-ended conversation about stuff. And I would listen for, how they handle their thoughts and how they talk to me about things, and just how they would talk about their existing job and whatever else, like just kind of make sure they could have a good conversation and that they were engaging to talk to. And then routinely I would ask two questions. It was really kind of the two main questions I would ask, and I kind of sprinkle them throughout the conversation. But the first question was, what do you like most about being in IT, right? And I would leave it as IT overall, mostly because I wasn't always talking to MSP seasoned engineers or technicians. And the second question was, what do you hate about working in the space? And I use the word hate on purpose. I was looking to see if I could garner some sort of response. Now, usually what would happen is the person would say, well, I love solving problems and helping people fix their blah, 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 whatever the thing happened to be. Well, on the hate side of the world, the ones that were potentially a challenge were the ones that got angry, right? There was plenty of times where I would talk about a thing, and I would ask them the question, and they would say, boy, when these users call up, and you could kind of hear it in their voice, or if it was on a video call, you could see it in their face. They would kind of get angry. They would kind of have that angry face and angry demeanor. That was a sign to me that says this person might have a challenge with like dealing with some of the people that we're gonna have to deal with, right? Because users do silly things from time to time, and they because they're not great technology users. That's why they hire us, right? Well, if the conversation was all about how stupid the users were and how this dumb thing that they did caused them all these issues, and you could just kind of hear the anger in their voice or the frustration in their voice, that was a red flag for me. On the flip side, if the person said, this thing really drives me crazy about working in IT, I really hate this, but they had any kind of empathy, right? These users, they do some silly things, but ultimately I know that they do their job and I do mine, and that I couldn't be a vet, and much like they can't fix their own computer stuff. Like if that's the kind of the tenor that they took, I knew that was an immediate green flag. I would absolutely want to move them into the next level of interviews. So then, presuming the person made it past my no a-hole test, which is admittedly was not actually that difficult of a test to get past, we would have them in for some conversations, and we would ask them for an example or two, or maybe even three examples of when they were frustrated with the user for whatever reason, right? We would want to hear what they had to say about a situation, right? And if they shared empathy in any of those conversations, we would be like, all right, this person probably is going to be okay as it relates to that. Certainly probably, not perfect, but probably fine. But the person that was like, man, users are the dumbest people in the world, or they stink. And frankly, I've had the users are the dumbest people in the world person in an interview before. That was immediate ejection, right? Also things like, if somebody really got in the weeds about having to be right about a thing, right? I had someone once argue with me about my Apple Watch in an interview. They were telling me a feature that the Apple Watch absolutely didn't have, and they needed to be right about it. And I was like, all right, this is a person that we are not hiring, because if they're having this conversation with me at the interview table when they're allegedly on their best behavior, what are they going to do when no one's paying attention to what they're saying, right? So those kinds of things are things you're looking for. You're just kind of looking for that kind of that. Are they like a solid human being or not? Are they generally empathetic with other individuals in the world? Also, during this interview process, we would have conversations around setting expectations, right? We would say, hey, we are a fairly mature MSP, or allegedly mature MSP maybe, and we have very strict ideas and procedures and processes around logging time. It's really important to us, and I would enumerate why it was important to us for just a minute. Is that something that you look forward to? Is that something you dread? And we would just kind of leave that kind of open-ended. And routinely, people would tell us how much they hate time entry, right? And it was like, boy, I really, really hate time entry. I think it's the stupidest thing in the world. I can't believe anyone's doing it. Seriously, I've had that happen in an interview before. So those people just self-select out of the interview process. Now, if someone's like, yeah, I really don't like it, but I understand it's part of the deal, probably not that big of a deal. And certainly if someone's like, yeah, I don't mind it at all, it's cool, fine, whatever it is part of my job, also fine. But it's usually you're looking for the people who are just quick to raise their hand and says, hey, I'm a bad fit for your company, right? You just ask them the questions and let them raise their hand as much as you possibly can without trying to get them in a gotcha situation. But you get them to raise their hand and say, I'm a bad fit for your company, and you say, thanks for coming in. We'll see you never again, right? Those kinds of conversations, right? Those are the ones that kind of come up. The whole point of this interview process is really to make sure, as much as you can, you find somebody who is a solid human being that can learn some technical stuff because they probably don't have it all figured out, and is not a jerk and won't be a jerk to you, your team, or your clients. All right, so you found someone to bring on board for your team. Awesome, congratulations. Now the work begins, right? The new hire process needs to set and reset these expectations all along the way. And the first thing I'll do is I'll drop a link up above to my new employee onboarding video, because it does talk a little bit about kind of this whole process overall. In part of your onboarding process, it's really important to address a few things. The first thing is, client empathy. It needs to be part of your conversation. You need to have that conversation multiple times, make sure that people are well equipped to deal with challenging clients. The second piece is make sure you're logging your time and documentation, and really make sure that you're saying this over and over and over again, especially if somebody isn't coming from a role that requires that. It's important for them to hear it from you multiple different times. And really, you want to build that overall onboarding process to get them up to speed with doing the job, but also do the job well and handle your clients. And, because frankly, your clients are the reason why you all have jobs anyway. Make sure they're handling those interactions as well as they possibly can. As part of the onboarding process, but also on the ongoing side of the world within your team, it's really important that you have that solid one-on-one process. I'll link to my one-on-one video up above, but this is a really good opportunity for you to check in with your team to see how they're doing about stuff. How are they doing with their, with client interactions? Do they need help? Are they frustrated by stuff, right? Part of our jobs is frustrating. Dealing with frustrated clients isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. So make sure they have an outlet for asking for help, outlet for maybe venting a little bit. That's not the worst thing in the world, especially if they're venting in a kind of a closed off space and not potentially venting where clients can hear them. And make sure that they have a place that they know they can come to you to talk about what's going on and get some coaching, versus this thing kind of festering and growing on its own and left unchecked. It becomes this big, ugly thing that eventually becomes a bigger and bigger problem for you and your clients. So make sure you have these ongoing one-on-ones to give them an opportunity to raise their hand and ask for help. Inside your one-on-ones and in your team meetings, and just kind of generally speaking within your MSP, I think it's really important to lead with empathy and coach for empathy with your team. As I mentioned before, you are a solid technology person. Your team is good at technology, right? That's the whole point of why you exist as an MSP. Your clients don't exist to be good at technology. Your clients that are vets exist to help animals that need help. Your clients that are in manufacturing exist to build and manufacture goods and services for their clients, right? You couldn't do their jobs, so you shouldn't expect them to be able to do your job too, right? So understand and coach that your team needs to understand that they could no better help fix an animal that needs help than the vet could solve their own computer issue. And it's okay that you're not good at their job, and it's okay that they're not good at your job. That's a really important thing to coach and teach and have just a regular conversation about, especially when there's a challenging client situation that exists, because they of course will exist. One book that I really recommend, and whether it's part of your new hire process or maybe even a book club, is The Compassionate Geek by Don Crowley. It's a really, really solid book, a fairly short and easy read as well, about how to handle this well and how to teach your engineers and teach yourself how to kind of handle these things with empathy, and to really provide that client service that you really should be providing, especially when led with empathy. Because most people, especially most non-technical people, don't necessarily have a great viewpoint of IT folk. It's just largely from media, but also from some of their own personal experience. So make sure that you're doing your best to be the person that kind of breaks that mold or breaks that stereotype of IT guys are kind of jerks to deal with. So what do you do when you have a tech that just won't listen? They won't adjust their behavior. Well, there's a few things. The first thing is you need to have very direct conversations with them. You can't beat around the bush when it's this kind of a situation. You have to say, I've observed this, there were reports of that, like, help me understand what's going on, help me help you, kind of a thing. If they're unwilling to be coached and unwilling to adjust their behavior, it might be time to let them go. Now, of course, you should follow all the normal performance improvement plan and document the whole thing, because it's just a smart thing to do that. But ultimately, you might have to let some of these folks go, right? I've had to let an amazing tech go because they couldn't log the time properly. It really sucked, but boy, let me tell you, right, almost immediately, everybody started logging their time correctly. Now, I'm not saying you should make an example of people, but you also need to make sure that you aren't tolerating bad behavior for longer than you need to, because you feel like you need a body in the seat, right? You need to hold your culture up. You need to make sure you don't have people working against your culture. I've also had a situation where I let the toxic tech go, and we immediately went from fully staffed to one tech understaffed, and immediately the performance of everybody came up, and it didn't require anything, and people were happier. You could just tell the whole mood was lighter within the whole organization. You can't hold on to these people if they are unwilling to be coached. Running a business isn't easy. Running an MSP is absolutely a challenge. Most of our challenges that we have in our business are people related, whether it's your clients or whether it's your staff. So hold the line, develop good culture. Don't allow your staff to become a challenge for your clients, and listen to both sets of folks when they are raising their hands saying, hey, there's something isn't quite right here. If you'd like to see a video about kind of the evolution of your tech staff, go ahead and click this video up above. And if you'd like to see my video on one-on-ones, go ahead and click that video as well. Thanks for coming in this ramble with me. I hope to see you on the next one.